Today I'm going to show how to set up a Garmin Drive Assist or Drive Smart for those that suffer from something known as directional dyslexia. This is also known as spatial dyslexia or geographical dyslexia, or sometimes dyscalculia. I will have some links in the description if you want to read up more on that. What it is that even with GPS, even with a satnav, what happens is that those that suffer from directional dyslexia still have a very hard time getting to places because there's too many distractions. When you have this form of dyslexia, it doesn't mean you're dumb or stupid. It doesn't mean that at all. Because most people that have directional dyslexia are actually very smart people. The problem is that when you have a complex set of directions, that's where everything goes to hell pretty much. So like you could live in the same town for 10, 20 years and still not know your left from your right at an intersection, or you may have problems reading an analog clock. You may have if you're in a restaurant and you go to the restroom and then you leave, you forget where your table was. It's anyway, in a car, what happens is that even with the assistance of the GPS, unless it's set up in a very specific way, you still have problems getting places, even though it's telling you where to go. So I'm going to show how this is done. Again, this is a Drive Smart. This is a Drive Assist 51, but this will also work with pretty much any Garmin GPS made after 2015 or 2016. Most of them, all the Drive Smarts, all the Drive Assists, including the 50, 51, 55, and 65 will apply to this. So let's get to it. And just so you know, that little blinking thing up there, this is one that has a dash cam built in. When I don't have a memory card for the dash cam in this unit, because I don't use the dash, I use a separate dash cam. That's just so you know what that is. So we're going to start, actually I'll just go to the settings. I'll just show you how it's done. So in the settings, I'm just going to go through these one by one. In the vehicle section, I would suggest just using stock arrow. In the driving map view, I would suggest using three-dimensional mode, because it actually is, it's kind of a bird's eye view. It's a little easier to read compared to two-dimensional, because the problem is when you're in two-dimensional, it really, as you can see, it scrunches things down too much. So you want 3D, so the lines are thicker, easier to process, your brain that is, easier for your brain to process. And in the map detail, you actually don't want more. You want normal, or if that's still too bothersome, less, because as you notice, it decreases the amount of information that is displayed on the screen. And most people would consider this a negative, but for those with directional dyslexia, this is a positive, because it's less for your brain to process when you're actually driving. But I'm going to set mine to just normal. But if it is an issue, set it to less. In the map theme, you've got a whole bunch of them here, but the one that is actually the best for those with directional dyslexia is the Garmin theme, for the reason that it places concentration on your route the most, and it also mutes the colors out for the other roads surrounding it. It is the best one to use. Now, as far as the map tools are concerned, I will get to this in a moment. This is, map tools is this menu right, this menu right here. I'll get to this in a minute. Now, where the map layers are concerned, turn them all off. There's checkboxes for all this stuff, uncheck. everything. Let's save that. Auto zoom, you can turn that off. I wouldn't suggest it. I would suggest leaving that enabled. My maps is just telling you what maps that you have loaded in the unit. If it's one like this, where you have Foursquare and Parkopedia, most of them have just this one, but if you have these two, I would suggest unchecking them. You don't need it. Now, where the driver assistance is concerned, this is kind of specific, sort of, to the Drive Assist 51 with the dash cam, because it's got dash cam stuff in it, but even those without dash cam have some of this stuff. Audible driver alerts, I don't want this thing beeping at me at all for anything. So I do a select all and then a deselect all. So all that is turned off while driving. It's not constantly beeping and blooping at me. The fatigue warning, I disable that. The proximity alerts is for things like red light cameras. At the time of this recording, I live in the state of Texas, and red light cameras were banned actually in 2019 or early 2020, so I have it disabled. I don't even need it because Texas doesn't use those anymore. Now, as far as this is for dash cam specific stuff. If your unit does not have a dash cam, you don't have to worry about this. I have basically all of this disabled. I don't want to know about collision warnings. I don't want to know that real vision thing where the dash cam automatically turns on when you're approaching a destination. I have the go alert disabled, lane departure, all that is disabled. Again, it's nothing but bleeping and blooping and distractions. So that is disabled. I don't want to know about that stuff. Basically, learn how to drive. If you're a safe driver, you don't need that stuff. And I believe that is it for that part. Yes. Now, where navigation is concerned, if you have the option for a route preview, you don't need it. Just turn it off. If you need it later, you can use the detour feature, which I'll get to in a moment. Faster time for route calculation. For avoidances, this is to your preference. If you want the easier route, usually you would avoid U-turns. I don't, just because of Texas. You have to do a lot of U-turns here. So I keep that disabled. And being I am driving by myself most of the time, I avoid the carpool lanes. And I avoid the unpaved roads. But this one here is personal preference. But if where you live does not require that many U-turns, then avoid the U-turns. Or have the Garmin avoid the U-turns. I don't, excuse me, I don't mess around with custom avoidances at all. I do avoid all the toll roads. That's a personal preference of mine. I go through environmental zones. The restricted mode, that means that if this is enabled, what happens is if you try to use the GPS while the vehicle is in motion, it's going to prompt a warning. I turn that off. And the GPS simulator, oops, go back there. The GPS simulator is what the mode I'm in now. You don't have to worry about that. That's just so I can demonstrate this stuff to you. And I believe that is about... Oh, there is one other thing. Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. Yeah, just for language and keyboard. Now, the default language, at least in the United States, is American English, Samantha. On the newer units, it's ZO. Spoken street names is good, but for those with directional dyslexia, maybe not. If you want a simpler voice, just this one. What this does is, instead of it saying in 500 feet turn left on Main Street, it will say in 500 feet turn left, and that's it. It will not pronounce the street name. If the pronunciation of the street names in the voice throws you off, then you should go to a voice that does not state the street names, and that's okay. You'll still be able to get there, it'll be fine. But so I'm going to go back to this because this really doesn't bother me all that much. Okay, so now the map. Over here, you can configure this menu. Well, let me get out of this first. You see a little wrench here. You tap the wrench, and then what you can do, it turns into a gear, and you can hit this, and then you can choose what you want on that menu. Now again, if you don't have a unit with a dash cam, that option won't show up. The ones that are the most important, well, let me just explain why I have it set the way I do. One row is easier to deal with instead of a stacked row, because if you do more than 4, it stacks it on one on top of the other. So what I do is I just pick the 4 that I want. Change route is good, stop is good, up ahead, bad, don't want that one. Turns, yes. This is what makes a Garmin worth using more than a phone. You'll see in a moment. Trip data, maybe. For me, yes. Volume, I don't worry about that because once it's set, it's set. Traffic conditions, I don't worry about because again, it's a distraction. So no, I won't use that. And the excuse me, the brightness stays where it's at. So now, once you have this all set, in addition, you can choose where these buttons are supposed to be. So what you can do is press and hold, and then you can move it. So what I do is I want turns to be the first thing on the right, because you get to the menu from the right. It's the shortest possible touch sequence, so to speak. And then after that, you have your trip data, which brings up this field, and each one of these fields is configurable. So what I'll do is I'm going to start with that first. Now, ordinarily you want the map to be like this, but when you have the trip data, what I suggest having is, well, let's just go and we'll do a route. We'll just go somewhere. I'm just going to pick a city. Yeah, we'll just do it that way. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the route.
Turn right at the traffic light.
Okay, I'm going to temporarily mute this so I can talk while this is going on. Now what happens is that when you are in a route, this changes on the right, and what I would suggest having is at the top right, your current direction. That's important to know. How much distance is left until you reach the destination, and how much time is left until you reach the destination. Now, it is true this is redundant. You have direction and direction here, but you can change this one if you want to. For example, let me just change this one to the arrival time. So let's just say this is the setup you have. This tells you where you're going. It's important to know what direction are you facing. Have that on screen, and then have your distance left, and then have your arrive-in time here, and then have your arrival time down here, and then your distance to the next turn is up here, and your speed is here. Pretty simple to understand, but here is the genius feature. Here's what makes this thing so wonderful compared to a phone. If you tap this and do the turns, now this is awesome, because now granted we don't see the other panel we just had, but this is more important, especially for those that suffer from directional dyslexia, because you have your map here, which is great, and you have what street am I on, you're down here, but most importantly, this gives you mental time to prepare for what's coming up next. This is lovely. It's not just the next turn, it's the next 4 turns. That is beautiful. If you have directional dyslexia, geographical dyslexia, dyscalculia, whatever you want to call it, this is a godsend. And only the Garmins have it. Google Maps does not do this. Magic Earth doesn't do this. TomTom does not do this as far as I know. Neither in the app or on their standalone satnavs. What's another one? Here We Go. That's another app. It doesn't do that either. Garmin is the only one that will show what turns are coming up, your current map, where you're headed towards, how long, the distance, and what road you're on right now. All this is shown all at once. And now you might be thinking, well, how does that make sense for someone who has directional dyslexia? Great question. I'll give you a great answer. Because this here, you'll notice, it doesn't move. It's just text. It's something that you can quickly look to the right and read and still get good concentration on the road. And if you have this set to less instead of more or most, that for someone with directional dyslexia, that this is the best possible setup you can have. I don't think you could do any better, because yeah, this moves and may serve as a point of minor distraction, but over here, this is absolutely, it's lovely. It's absolutely fantastic because, again, it is not a distraction. This is actual good information that will help you instead of hinder you to get from point A to B. And yes, you can get rid of this just by tapping this little guy up here, and you can go back to this again. But chances are, depending on the severity of the directional dyslexia that you have, you're probably going to have that turned on all the time. So ultimately, yeah, you're going to be in good shape as long as you always have this on. Now, there's only one problem with doing this. Let's just say I stop my route. Okay. And I'm going to take off and do the same thing again. So if I go to where to, and I'm just going to do that again. Let's take a moment here. So I restart my route. The problem is that the turns does not automatically enable. That's the only thing. You have to remember to hit this and then hit this whenever you start a route. And then you're all set. And that is pretty much all there is to it. So again, if you have the directional dyslexia, this is as good as it gets. It's as good as it gets. Get a Garmin, a Drive Smart, a Drive Assist. They, excuse me, all pretty much work the same. And that's it. Take it easy.